Congressman Mark Pocan taking your tweets and comments on YouTube. Actually, we've got some YouTube questions as well. And Congressman, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm having a problem now getting questions, so I'm just going to have to listen to you because I can't get to work.
Yeah, you're stuck with me. Pork Grind asks, Congressman Pocan, what will you and the rest of the Democrats do about opposing Trump's draconian proposed cuts, his budget cuts, to Medicare and Medicaid? And I would add Social Security to that. Trump wants to cut all three.
Yeah, so, the president introduced his budget on Monday, and on many levels, it was ridiculous. No investment in infrastructure that he keeps telling us he's for. It had deep cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, and obviously there's no way we're going to accept that in what we send out of the House. So it's really a DOA, a dead on arrival proposal to do that, but it shows where his priorities are, and we'll see how hard the Republicans fight for those priorities. He had deep cuts to Department of Education, Human Services, Interior, all these different departments that affect, that really help American citizens. None of those are going to happen. He even had cuts to the National Institutes of Health, which even when Republicans were in control, we actually added very, very modest increases too. So in a way, it was kind of a ridiculous document because it's not going to be anything close to what we pass out of the House. It's not going to be close to what goes into law. More money for the wall he's trying to get, even though we still haven't given him any money for the wall. So I think people can be rest assured that that document is really more of the president's fantasy and the Republicans' fantasy than any reality.
Yeah, there you go. Johnny Joe Johnson, it was just reported that Paul Manafort was given six and a half years, I believe, by Judge Jackson, but it's concurrent rather than consecutive. So, he'll serve basically an additional 3.5 years. Johnny Joe Jackson asks over on YouTube, if Manafort was black, he'd have gotten life in prison. If he was Muslim, it would be the death penalty. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you, when he got his first sentencing, a lot of us were very unhappy on the floor of Congress. We were talking to each other because, if one of our constituents had did something minor, they would have gotten far more serious time. In fact, I think someone did in one state, voted improperly. I'm not sure if they voted twice or what it was, and they got a longer sentence than Paul Manafort for everything he did. So we do think, that was pretty seriously out of whack. I think the real test now is, will Donald Trump in some way pardon him? And if he does, I think that's going to open up a serious can of worms.
Ricardo Minami over on Twitter asks, please ask Congressman Pocan who he is supporting for the Democratic presidential nomination.
I'm staying out of it for right now. There's a number of candidates I like for different reasons. Bernie Sanders, we wouldn't be talking about the issues we're talking about today if it wasn't for Bernie Sanders. Medicare for all, debt-free college, a number of the proposals he's put out there. He was the first person who gave a real national voice to those issues, and I have tremendous respect for that. Elizabeth Warren has been a tremendous advocate for a lot of progressive issues. I get in trouble once I start going down the laundry list, so I'm probably going to stop saying names other than, people like Beto O'Rourke, who I think is going to announce is the guy that you would want to be your neighbor or brother-in-law, because I guarantee he would be plowing your snow if you live in the upper Midwest before you got out to shovel. He's just a decent person. There's a lot of people who have interesting attributes coming into this presidential race, and I'm going to wait to see what issues they take up, what they prioritize. But as a progressive caucus, we're going to make sure that the issues we care about, we're going to put front and center. So from climate change to debt-free college to Medicare for all to a lot of other issues, our job is to make sure they're all talking about those things. Yeah,
and along those lines, Mohangi R. Jones, again, Mohagani, my apologies if I'm mangling people's names here, says, we have a lot of Democratic 2020 candidates. How do we not divide ourselves among candidates and come together in our shared Democrat, #Democrat, I would say democratic, but values? And that's a good question. In fact, you're the guy who informed me, who taught me that we should be talking about values rather than issues. We should be calling these things values and talking about values rather than issues, because issues are contained within the container, the larger container of values.
Yep. Values unite, issues divide. It's something Nancy Pelosi told us when we got sworn in. She said it many times, and I found it to be a very profound statement because people do connect with us on the values. Individual bills, you can get lost on details. Like one provision on one page of 500 pages, and they'll talk all about that one provision. But when you talk about everyone should have affordable, everyone should have access to healthcare, period, and we should be able to do some cost containments on healthcare, who would actually disagree with that? when you talk about the fact that anyone who's smart enough and able enough should be able to go to get a higher education or a registered apprenticeship, even if they can't afford to, we need to be able to help with that. Very few people would actually disagree with that. So when we talk about those bigger values, we're in a lot better place. I would also say to that person who tweeted, part of it is incumbent on us. If someone doesn't agree with us on every single issue, they are not evil. And I think it's important we say that correctly. I mean, there's something I like and probably don't like about every single candidate who's running for president. And I could say that for everyone in my family, for that matter, too, right? And I think we have to be cognizant that, if we do it in a more uplifting way, we can come through a big primary unscathed and be in the best position to win the White House and the Senate back and keep the House of Representatives. So really, it is incumbent on us to, again, just because you disagree with a provision of someone doesn't mean they're evil. We need to be very careful about how we talk about other candidates.
Yeah. No Way just tweeted to both of us an article from the Washington Post about this woman in Texas who I believe Greg Abbott is the governor down there. I forget the name of the AG, but she got sentenced to 5 years in prison.
That's the one I was trying to refer to,
for voting while on parole. By the way, this is also happening in North Carolina, I believe. They're aggressively going after mostly people who have felony convictions who didn't realize that they couldn't vote and went ahead and voted, and they're sending them back to prison and all these kind of things by way of basically, in my opinion, scaring people away from the polls, particularly people who might ever have been in any trouble with the law, particularly people of color who are concerned. They know that the crosshairs are already on them. The bullseye on their back, or whatever the metaphor you want to use, and they're not sure. I don't know if that speeding ticket qualifies. Am I going to go to jail for voting after I got a speeding ticket, or my headlight was knocked out, or what does it take? This seems to me like voter suppression. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, let me crank it one more rung up the racist ladder that this White House does. The same is true as how ICE is going after people across this country. We know there's probably 11 to 13 million undocumented people, but we're clearly not, as a directive, going after those folks. We're told that ICE, first of all, ICE was created after 9/11 for domestic terrorism. We're told they're going after gang members, MS-13, human traffickers, and drug dealers. And we just got an open records request back from ICE that, first of all, they didn't answer most of our questions. We have to appeal it. But about 40% of the people they apprehended in a raid in Wisconsin had no offenses whatsoever. And so people and others had traffic offenses, the ones that did have any offense. So suddenly you're making people like that also afraid to leave their homes. So all of this is, again, meant on, if you happen to have brown or black skin, or you happen to maybe be from a religion that's not in the mainstream here in the United States, that they're trying to demonize people. And I think it's true in voter suppression. And I think it's true also in how they are working with things like the abuse of how ICE is operating.
So as a member of Congress, what do you do about that?
Well, on ICE, I mean, one, I think they're incredibly stupid. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I can affect their budget, and the fact that I had to wait 138 days to get basically an FU, Freedom of Information Act request is what I got back from them. They gave me 290, I think, 8 redacted pages out of 400, and then they didn't answer most of my questions. But what we did find out is, again, they're not going after what they say they are. This agency is being misused by this White House in a rogue fashion to be his personal police force. And we're going to be very aggressive on it. So I've already talked to the woman who's the chair of the Appropriations Committee that has oversight over Homeland Security. They're going to pay a price. So we're going to have to make sure they operate properly. But to be that arrogant to a member of Congress, my first Freedom of Information Act request I've ever had to make is in Congress over 6 years. Pretty stunning.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Douglas Clark says Republicans won't pass anything progressive. So what's the strategy with regard, you've passed some really good stuff already out of the House of Representatives. There's a long list of other things getting ready to be passed, but they're going to die in the Senate. So what's the strategy here?
So we'll send them to the Senate. Hope we can get some passed. I mean, right now, I think our resolution of disapproval of the president's national emergency would pass if it went to the floor of the Senate. So they're trying to figure a way out of it right now to get rid of it without having to have a vote and embarrass the president. But there are probably other votes to do just that. But we'll, for like H.R. 1, we'll break it into little pieces and send it over. What we're trying to do is, one, if we can't get it passed through the Senate and through this president, we're showing what will happen if you had other people in charge. So if the Democrats were in charge, we actually could clean up some of the undue influence of special interest in Washington. We can make it so that everyone can be heard through their vote, which is how you have a democracy. We can go after gun violence and have some preventive efforts passed. We can go after things like pay equity and the minimum wage and healthcare and all the things that we need to. And every time the Senate doesn't take it up, it's another example of what happens in 2020 if people look to have Democrats in charge of the White House and the Senate.
Okay, great. Mike, Old Tech Mike is the Twitter handle. He says, Mike from Fresno. Can congressmen and women say it like it is? A successful impeachment would require 20 Republican senators. I'm not sure exactly what the question is there, but you and I talked about the politics of this earlier, and essentially you said, I believe my understanding of what you said was, as we continue these investigations, we're going to find more and more evidence, and eventually it's going to reach this point where it's overwhelming. The political equation, it seems to me, is that if we were going to impeach Donald Trump, rather than doing it in March of 2017, we should be doing it in March of 2019. We should be doing it in March of 2020, just strategically. And maybe the politics of this are kind of beyond the pale. I don't know. But that would be, leading up to the election, and all of his crimes and hideous activities would be coming out in the public as a consequence of those hearings in time for the election, rather than a year and a half in advance where people will forget, number one. Or number two, what do you think it's going to take for 15 or 20 Republicans in the United States Senate to come to that Bob Corker, Jeff Flake moment and say, this guy is not somebody who I'm going to follow?
Yeah, I think for them to stand up to Donald Trump, it's going to be at a point that it's too late, quite honestly, to stand up to Donald Trump. They're going to realize they're past the point of no return. I think they know that their party is largely, their futures are determined by how the White House does. And they're going to keep riding with him until it becomes too late. And I don't know if they'll be able to change direction. I would say that don't forget, much of what our hearings are on go way beyond the Mueller investigation. So there are a lot of areas around the Emoluments Clause and other issues that have not been part of the Mueller report that could very likely come out of the proper oversight that Congress needed to do and that Paul Ryan didn't do for the last 2 years. So I would argue, everything we're doing is still exactly in the right direction. If you're going to build that support of those Republicans that we need for impeachment. And, again, to me, I really want to view it as a constitutional issue, not a political issue. And, we have to do something if it becomes that the evidence is overwhelming that we have got enough support to do it. We actually just have to act. I'm not wild about Mike Pence being president, but you have to go after someone who's been that crooked.